The lights in the studio burned hotter than usual that night. The cameras, perched on steel stands with their little red eyes glowing, seemed to watch every twitch of a hand, every bead of sweat rolling down a forehead. The tension was thick, so thick it carried a taste. Metallic, bitter, like iron left too long in the rain. The audience at home couldn't smell it, couldn't feel the heat pushing down on the stage. But if you had been in that room, you'd swear the air itself was charged like a storm on the verge of breaking. Rudy Giuliani sat in his chair with the posture of a man who once carried an entire city on his shoulders but now struggled just to balance his own ego. His face, flushed from years of scotch and late nights, still carried the traces of his once legendary confidence. America's mayor, they had called him after 9/11, a man of iron will, of decisive action. But the years had chipped away at that image like wind carving stone. Scandals, lawsuits, late-night television mockery, his reputation, once a monument, had been reduced to rubble. Still, in his own mind, Giuliani remained untouchable. Across from him sat Jasmine Crockett, a freshman congresswoman from Texas, her hair gleaming under the studio lights like polished obsidian. She carried herself with the poise of someone who knew where she came from and where she was going. Crockett was not born into wealth or political dynasty. She came up through the grit of Dallas, where her mother worked 2 jobs and her father, a retired military man, never let her forget the value of discipline. Law school had been a battlefield of its own, and she came out of it scarred but sharper. For her, politics wasn't about personal glory. It was survival, it was representation, it was the refusal to let her community's voice be drowned out by the noise of Washington's endless games. The segment was supposed to be routine. A debate about integrity, leadership, and the future of American politics. But routine is never routine when 2 forces collide in a room full of lights and microphones. The host had barely finished the introduction when Giuliani leaned forward, his voice cutting through the air like a serrated blade. "She's a mistake," he said, pointing one bony finger toward Crockett as though she were a smudge on the lens of history. His words dripped with contempt, with the weight of an older generation's dismissal. A mistake of the Democratic Party, a mistake of her district, a mistake in judgment. She's loud, she's inexperienced, and she's dragging this country further into chaos. The words hit the air and hung there. The studio fell into a silence so heavy that even the cameramen shifted uneasily. Crockett did not flinch. She had been called worse. On the streets, in courtrooms, even in whispers behind closed doors at the Capitol. But there was something about the way Giuliani said it. Not just a critique, not even an insult. He said it as if she should not exist. As if her very presence was an error, an anomaly in the story he believed America should tell. She sat still for a moment, her hands folded in her lap, her heartbeat steadying itself. And then she leaned forward, her voice quiet but sharp, every syllable landing like a nail into wood. "Mistake," she said. "No, Mr. Giuliani, I am not a mistake. I am the correction." The audience, both in the studio and those watching at home, felt the floor shift. Something had been set in motion. Giuliani blinked, taken aback by her composure. He had expected outrage, anger, maybe even tears. Instead, Crockett's gaze held him like a mirror reflecting every crack in his armor. But before the moment could close, she began to speak. Not with sound bites or rehearsed lines, but with a story. She told them about her grandmother, who cleaned houses for white families in East Texas and kept a worn Bible in her apron pocket to remind herself that dignity could not be taken by calloused hands. She told them about the nights her mother came home too tired to eat, collapsing into bed so her children might have a chance at something better. She told them about standing in courtrooms where defendants had no one to speak for them, and how she became that voice, because silence was never an option. Every word she spoke was a thread, weaving together not just her own story but the story of millions who had been told, again and again, that they were mistakes. And as Giuliani listened, a strange thing happened. For the first time in a long while, he had no words, but Crockett wasn't finished. "You say I am a mistake," she continued, her tone rising, not in volume but in weight. "True. Giuliani, have lived long enough to prove what true mistakes look like. You were handed power, and you squandered it. You were given trust, and you broke it. You had the love of a city, and you turned it into ridicule. Mistakes aren't born, they are made. And you, sir, made yourself one." The studio erupted. Some gasped, some clapped, some sat frozen as though witnessing a duel where the final blow had just been struck. Giuliani tried to laugh it off, tried to muster that old New York bravado, but the words stuck in his throat. Because somewhere, deep inside the crumbling edifice of his pride, he knew she was right. What happened next would spiral into headlines, social media storms, and the slow unraveling of Giuliani's public image. Clips of the exchange went viral within hours, shared not just as political commentary, but as a cultural moment, a generational passing of the torch. Young people quoted Crockett's line, "I am the correction," as though it were scripture. Late-night comedians replayed Giuliani's stunned silence on loop. Even some of his old allies, privately, admitted the damage was irreversible. But for Crockett, the moment was not about victory. It was about truth. And truth has a way of breaking chains in unexpected places. There were subplots to this story, threads that connected the clash to larger battles being fought in America. One was Crockett's own internal conflict, her fear that stepping too boldly would make her a target. She had received threats before, the kind that make you check your locks twice at night and hesitate when a strange car lingers too long outside your house. Speaking truth to power was never without cost. And yet, as she stood in the studio that night, she realized that silence would cost even more. Another subplot unfolded miles away in New York City, where a young law student named Anika watched the exchange on her cracked iPhone. She was a first-generation immigrant, the daughter of a cab driver, and she had been questioning whether the law was her path. But as she listened to Crockett dismantle Giuliani, she felt something ignite, a reminder that the courtroom could still be a place where justice sang. She picked up her books the next morning with a resolve that felt like destiny. Meanwhile, Giuliani returned home that night to his Manhattan apartment, where the once silent phone buzzed with endless notifications, angry texts from old colleagues, panicked calls from advisors, messages from his daughter begging him to step back before he lost everything. Alone in the glow of a single lamp, he poured himself a drink and muttered the word that had haunted him since the cameras shut off: mistake. For the first time, he wondered if the mistake was not her, but him. The climax came weeks later, when Giuliani was invited back to defend himself on another network. He tried to spin, to lash out, to reclaim the bravado. But the clip of Crockett's words kept playing in the background of the nation's mind, and nothing he said could erase it. His career, already teetering, crumbled under the weight of that one televised exchange. And Crockett, she carried on, not with arrogance, not with gloating, but with a renewed sense of mission. In speeches across the country, she reminded audiences that power does not belong to those who cling to it with fear, but to those willing to use it in service of others. The resolution of this story is not just that one man's career collapsed. It is that voices once dismissed as mistakes began to echo louder, weaving a new narrative for America's future. Giuliani faded into the shadows of late-night punchlines, while Crockett rose into the light of a movement larger than herself. And the life lesson: it is this: never believe the lie that your existence is an error. Those who try to erase you often fear the truth you represent, and when truth finally stands its ground, calm, steady, unshaken, it has the power to destroy the loudest lies and rewrite the story for generations to come.